Living my bucolic life, we have facing strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful our houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
So before I sew the sleeve onto the jacket, I'm actually going to do the buttonhole and put the button on. And I was digging in my button stash and I found these. And I've had them forever. I have 9 of them. And I think they're going to be perfect because flannel, forest green, a little imitation leather jacket. It's plastic, it's not leather, it's plastic, so it'll go through the wash. But you know, it's hard to find the perfect outfit that these can go on, but I think this will be it. So I think that'll be fun. What I need to do is mark on my cuff on the part that is the over, the back part that has the pleat here, where I need to start my buttonhole. So on the pattern, here's the little buttonhole marking, and I just punched a hole in the very beginning of it. I don't need to worry about this side because I'm still deciding how long my buttonhole is going to be. Now remember, we drew all over this already, so this line is a seam allowance, that line's a seam allowance. So this corner here is the actual finished folded edge of my cuff. So I can match that up over here to this corner, okay? Right here, and put a little dot with my pencil. Actually, I'm going to use the chalk. The chalk seemed to come off better than the chalk pencil. So what I also need to do is, because I need a line that's going this way, parallel with the edge, and I need a line that's going this way, which is the track of my buttonhole. From on the line here, the button end of the buttonhole line to my 5/8 line, and that's 1/2 inch, okay? So I can line up my ruler at the edge here and put a little mark at that 1/2 inch. Okay, so I have a tiny line here at 1/2 inch. So that little dot was actually in just a bit. I punched it a little too far out. Now I actually have to make a line this way, and I'm going to put it in line with that dot, but so that it's perfectly straight with the edge of my cuff over here. And it looks like that is about 1 1/8 inches. Okay, so now I have that. And that is all the marking that I need for my buttonhole, because that gives me a position to start my needle. And when I start it, I'm very careful when I first put my needle down, and it's at the very beginning of the mechanism for the buttonhole, that it's in that center where those crosshairs are. So my buttons are a fat 5/8 with a shank. And I tried a few different buttonholes. This is the 5/8 with the keyhole. This is a 3/4 because I was thinking it needed to be bigger. And then this is just the standard 5/8. And actually, I think it's because my flannel is so soft and I've been making so many very, very stiff things lately. I was thinking that it needed to be bigger, but it doesn't. And so actually, I'm just going to be going with the standard 5/8 buttonhole. I think it's going to work really well. I have it lined up with my crosshairs that I drew with the chalk before. And just let it go. Okay, and I actually make a little extra swoop down here towards the edge because that's where all the wear is going to be. Push it down as you pull it out because there are little teeth in there. And there you go. Nice, neat little buttonhole. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other one. Okay, now I'm going to sew the button on. So I'm punching out the little X, which is the button placement for my size. Oh dear. And just like for this one, I'm going to place, because I already have those seam allowances marked, I'm going to place the little pattern piece on my cuff, mark that little hole through, and that should be in line with the buttonhole, and it looks like it is. So that's where I'm going to sew it on, and I am going to be doing my, thank you, I can't remember offhand who told me, but this method is called a loop start. I'm going to do my loop start method where I have both of the ends pulled through the eye of my needle with a little loop at the end. My thread is about 1 foot long, not too long. I'm going to go down, back up, and put my needle through the little loop, and that secures it to get started. And I have this buttonhole, this button thread is fairly strong, so I'm probably just going to take 3 or 4 little swipes to get it on here. Okay, so I've got them sewed on. I think they look great. I have a little, my scrap here, I just got damp with some water. And just give a little scrub onto those chalk marks to try to make sure that they disappear entirely. So now I can button her back up and not have to look at those little marks. So anyhow, I think that that's a nice combination. So the next thing I need to do is work on attaching these sleeves. Now, since everything else in this shirt so far is a nice enclosed sleeve, we're going to do the same thing up here. We're going to sew the sleeve on with a French seam, okay? Which is not as impossible as it sounds. So up here at the top of my sleeve head is where I'm going to need to be easing a little bit of that in, so it's going to set in nicely into that sleeve. It shouldn't actually need very much. I'm pretty sure it's a pretty flat sleeve head. So instead of running 2 rows of stitching, I am going to do my finger crimping thing up here. Probably start about 1 inch before this dot and go to about 1 inch after, just to make sure I have it all encompassed. Okay, so when I say finger crimping, this is what I mean. I have my stitch length set at about 3, and I'm just doing a straight stitch. I am doing probably close to 3/8 of an inch over here, so I'm about 1/4 inch in from my final seam allowance. I put my finger back of my presser foot, press it up against the back of the foot and down, and I just start sewing. And it's going to acquire a lot of puckers back here. When it gets too much, I let it go and start again. And I'm going to go about 1 inch past that dot, just for safety's sake. So now, if you look at it, it has all of these sweet little puckers built into it, and I can lift it up like this, and it's going to make a nice little sleeve head. So that should be plenty for setting it in to the rest of the bodice. All right, so we're going to get started putting our sleeves together. So first thing is you want to make sure you're putting the right sleeve on the right side. So this is my shirt. This is the right side of my shirt. Here's my pockets. You know, that's the front. And I have my sleeve inside out, inside, okay? So this is the right side, this is the wrong side is out right now. And, you know, 2 notches is back, 1 notch is front. Make sure you have the right one. Okay, so I'm going to put a pin here. I have a little clip where my center top is, right here, okay? I'm going to match that up with that line. Do you remember we drew a line? Oh, I can faintly see it. Chalk, it's so weird. It's there forever when you don't want it. When you want to keep it, it disappears. But this line right here, that is my shoulder top. That's what this is matching up to. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pin that up there. Now, I need to match my notches, and I can tell that my sleeve, just by having it on my dress form and having these armholes unprotected and unstabilized. They were starting to stretch out of shape, but I can kind of mold them back into alignment. I'm going to what's going to seem like overpin, but I would rather overpin in the beginning than have headaches later, you know? So I'm going to go ahead and do that, match up these sides, work that gather that's already there in. See this dot here should match up with the dot here, and it will. And my amount of ease that I worked in with my crimp worked perfectly. Isn't that fabulous? So this part here is very smooth. Up here is crimped in, but that's just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that. Just give me a minute to finish pinning this. I'll be right back. Okay, so I have it all pinned, but before I sew it, go back and make sure that this is an outside and this is an outside, and that the two wrong sides are together. Make sure you do that before you stitch it, because then you'll just have to pull it out. And I'm going to be sewing this at about a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Okay, so I've got it stitched on, and if you're going up where the easing is and you get some puckers, that's okay. This is going to be hidden anyway. So what I'm going to do right now is actually come around and trim it just to make sure that I am close enough and even enough. So you can see I'm coming in, so I am just under 1/4 inch, because it, you know, it gets like that. There's no way around that. So coming in, cleaning this up, giving myself a nice even edge before I go to the next step. All right, so with everything trimmed, you know, nice and even and fairly close, I'm going to go ahead and turn my entire shirt inside out now. All right, so the first thing I want to do is press my seam allowance over to one side, all right? And I got a sleeve rule here just so I can kind of manipulate around it. And at this point, it doesn't matter that much which side you're pressing to, as long as you're pressing to one of the sides, because that'll make it easier when you go to fold it. Okay, so now on this side, everything has been pressed over. The seam allowances to one side or the other, okay? So this is now the inside of my shirt, and I am going to fold it in half with the, hang on, the seamed edge at the very edge of my fold. And you can kind of see here what I meant about the bulk of all of the, this is the sleeve, so the bulk of all the sleeve seam allowance is over here, and of the shirt seam allowance is over here. So you actually get a really nice even even seam that way. All right, so I'm just going to continue folding it over and pinning it all the way around, making sure that I keep my little stitched edge right up here at the very top. Okay, so now that I have it all pinned, I'm putting the sleeve back inside here just to get it out of the way while I'm sewing. Pull her back inside. So now I have an armhole that looks like this. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to sew around again at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So a 1/4 first, 3/8 now. That should give me my 5/8 that I needed. And I am going to actually start it. So if this is my sewing machine over here, I'm going to start it up here. Here's my bottom, my underarm seam. I'm going to start it probably closer to where that notch is. Go all the way around, past that notch, past the underarm, and come over here. That way I have 2 rows of stitching on the bottom. This looks like a fairly roomy armhole, so I don't think it's an issue, but that way, if there is any strain or anything wants to split, it's usually down here. If I have 2 rows of stitching holding it in, you know, less chance of that. If you have a flatbed sewing machine, not a free arm like I do, it's a lot easier to sew it with the bodice on the outside and the sleeve on the inside. That way it can run around the edge a lot smoother. Okay, so I've just sewn my 3/8 inch-ish. You know, I got to admit some of it got a little bit wider when I got over the thicker spots, but I don't think that's a problem. I just got done sewing all that, going around the outside, making sure everything looks good. You know, if you've done something and you've caught something, just pick it out and put a new seam in. That's okay. All right, so if I turn it now to the outside, looks good. I have a nice, oops, I got a little thread sticking out there. I have a nice seam, and on the inside of the jacket, it's all encased and very secure and very protected. Nothing is going to fray, and I think it looks a lot classier than just all of those raw edges out. So that is a French seamed sleeve insertion. How fun is that? I'm going to go ahead and do the other side off camera, and then we can proceed. This is what we've got so far. I think it's really neat. Now there's a band that's going to be going straight down the front, so these don't actually overlap like this. There's a band that's going to overlap, so I'm just kind of placing them side by side so that we can see what it's going to look like. I think it's really cute. Okay, so here's my little cuff and everything. Now here's another thing. One of the reasons why I really wanted to make sure everything looked really nice inside is because there's a good chance that I will be using this as a throw over something, almost treating it like a light jacket, okay? And if I'm doing that, I'm going to be leaving it unbuttoned most likely. And because it'll be unbuttoned, it'll be visible in here, so why not make it super neat, you know? Plus, sometimes you're just in the mood for French seams. All right, so now before I actually can put this front band on, I need to do a narrow hem, and that's because the front band, I think, is going to kind of encapsulate it. So the hem has to be finished ahead of time. So there's two different bottom options on this pattern. One is flat, which is what I did. The other is more like a traditional shirt tails type. So I'm just going to make a very simple rolled hem. You know, everything else on this shirt is complicated, so why add trouble? So basically, I'm not going to make it a tiny, tiny rolled hem, but flat. Something kind of similar to all the French seams we have, okay? So I'm just going to fold it in about 1/8 of an inch, and then fold it in again. And my second fold is going to be about 1/4 inch. And that should coordinate with all of this kind of stuff that we have going on. What I would do though is before you hem it, try it on and see if it's the right length that you want. I can tell you, now I am about 5'4 1/2-ish, that the length of this on me comes way down, covers my whole rear, and is down into that thigh area. And I kind of like that because, you know, it's flannel, and if it's winter time and say I'm wearing leggings or something, if I put this on, it's going to cover all of the uncomfortable, unmentionable areas. Now when you're folding up your hem, if you've done it my way and you're using thick fabric like I am, when you get to the point that you're hemming up the side seam with a very narrow hem, it's a little unwieldy. What I'm going to do is come in here, and this whole bottom area, like the first 1/4 inch, I'm just going to clip that out. So that way, instead of 3 layers of quadruple folded fabric, I'm only going to have 2 layers of it, okay? And so I can just tuck that in. It's a lot flatter, and just continue on. And I'm really not going to worry about this 1/4 inch of fabric fraying. I think that my stitches will be small enough and tight enough that going over that's going to hold it in really nicely. So I just want to give you a little close-up view. This is where I cut that little chunk off, but I don't know if you can tell, but it's laying a whole lot flatter, less bulk, you know how I am about that. And it's a nice little hem. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is interface all of my front band and collar pieces. So on the front bands, you're going to interface both of them. For the collar, you're going to interface one of them, and for the band, you're going to interface one of them. And just like the cuffs, I am using a very lightweight interfacing. So I have my front bands interfaced. I got them both here, and I need to mark a couple things. Now, I am not going to be marking my buttonholes or my button placement marks at this time. We will do that later. What I need to mark is exactly where this fold line is here. So what I'm going to do is punch out this little hole up here, and I'm going to punch out a little hole, even though it doesn't have it marked. I'm going to punch it out where this stitching line crosses that fold line down here. And that's going to give me 2 points that I can then connect, because it's important that that fold line is exact. And since I am writing on interfacing, I can use my heat erasable pen to make a dot there and a dot here. And now I need to go get a very long ruler to connect these. Okay, I went and got my old yardstick. If you don't have one that long, honestly, you can just punch another hole right here, and that way you have 2 separate ones you can connect. But getting my old yardstick that came from my grandmother's house years ago, miss her terribly, I'm going to connect them with a fold line like that I can see very clearly, okay? All right, my camera's freaking out, so I'm going to give this another go. On the wrong side, I drew the center fold line that's marked on the pattern here. It's marked right here, okay? On the right side, I'm going to draw up here at the top a line at 5/8 of an inch, okay? And down here at the bottom, a line at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, I'm going to do that. See, there's my little line at the bottom. Because what I'm going to need to do is, I'm not going to pre-fold the entire thing, but I will be pre-folding this top part. And they want it at 5/8. Okay, so folding it at that mark, I'm just going to pin it in like this here at the top, and like this here at the bottom, okay? Then with that done, I need to come back and fold it this way, and that's why I marked it on the inside where I can see it. Okay, so folding it on this fold line, I'm just dealing with the ends right now. I have it folded this way, 5/8 of an inch, and this way on that fold line that's marked on the pattern band right here. Now we're just dealing with the bottom right now. The top is just like this, okay? The bottom is flat. So now I'm going to stitch straight across here at the bottom, over the fold and everything, so I can flip it right side out. Okay, so I have this stitched, and what I would recommend is, however much fabric you use to hem up your narrow hem at the bottom of your shirt, that's how much you should make your seam allowance here. I used about 1/4 inch and about 1/4 inch because it's fat. You know, I'm taking into consideration the edges. So I did closer to like a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. You know, you can always ease it and you can always adjust it at the very top, but that's in general what I would do. So I'm going to come in here, trim the top layer, cut it at a diagonal, and turn it right side out like this. Get my super chopstick over here and poke out that corner. Okay, so now that I have this all settled, now I'll go ahead and make sure that I have it folded in the line that I drew and press it. I didn't want to press it before because I was going to be pressing it the wrong way, but I will press this flat. I am not pressing this under though. It's just a personal preference. I prefer to wait until I'm actually putting it in its final position to make that fold. Okay, so here is my front of my shirt. Here's one of the bands. So I have it here so that my sewn edge is at the bottom and my folded in edge is down here, and I have it upside down like this. So you're going to make sure you put, if you're looking at it like this side goes with this, because you're going to flip it over like that. All right, so I'm going to match up my bottom edge here, and I want to make sure I leave this part of the band open, because when I'm stitching I'm going to have to open it up like that a little bit to get my foot in here. So there's a notch up here, and I'm going to be matching those two notches together, and then just go ahead and pin it on, and I would start sewing at the top, work your way down. When you get down to the bottom, you're going to open it up a little bit just to get your stitching all the way down to the edge here. And do that for both sides. It's the exact same band procedure for both sides of the shirt. Okay, so now that I have this sewn on, okay, I'm going to come back and trim, just grading it a little bit. If you are doing a shirt fabric that is not as bulky as this flannel, you know, you might not need to do this, but I am, mostly because I'm going to have to be sewing buttonholes onto these bands. And I know my buttonholer, and it gets very angry if there is a drop off, if there's a lot of thickness there. So it's a lot easier for me to come in and grade this out now than it is to fight with my buttonholer later. Now also down here in the corners, I am clipping that in some so that it'll tuck in there easily. So now I can just lay it flat. I need to go over to my ironing board and press this seam allowance in so it's going to hug it nice and tightly. Okay, so now that the seam allowance is pressed in towards the band here and it's graded down so I don't have a huge step, I'm just going to fold it in and pin it so that it is just coming to where my stitching line is, because you guessed it, I am going to be whip stitching this closed. So all of this part that I have not pre-folded, this is the time where I'm going to fold it in, make sure it comes to exactly the right spot, and put a pin in it that way. Once I have it pinned, I will press it and then I'll whip stitch it. Actually, okay, so I've just done this a little bit and I can tell that is still too thick right there. And that's not going to work with my buttonholer, and that's because I have this layer with interfacing and this layer with interfacing in there. So pulling that pin out, and I'm going to come back in here with my pinking shears. And I am just going to pink this entire layer here. I think that that's going to help me out. So sometimes you just have to go back and do it again. But that's because when I run my buttonholer down there, it's just not going to work. She's going to throw a fit, and then I'll end up having to do something else. So here we go. Now, if you were putting snaps or something, ooh, and that's something I haven't done before, is snaps. But if you're doing snaps, you know, you can just pound through it, but I am not right now. So, you know, do what you need to do for your particular fabric. All right, so I did press it after I pinned it. And I usually don't like to press things when it pins because those pins can set in and make a mark. So I try not to hit it too hard, but I really want to get in between just to compress this a little bit before I started to come back in here and stitch it. All right, so with this whole band stitched in by hand on the back here, just ignore the cat hair or whatever that was. It looks really nice, okay, and that's what we're going for. We're going for a shirt that is nice on the inside and on the outside. Hello, me again, and just going to give you a quick recap of what's happened here in the last 20 minutes or so. I went forward. I was starting to make the collar based on their instructions. I got my top part of my collar put together, and I realized I don't like their instructions. So I don't want to show a video of me making that collar based on their instructions because it's not my favorite way. But I've run out of fabric, so I cannot make a new collar for this shirt the way I want to with the fabric that's going to match this shirt. So what that means is this one I made that I'm not thrilled with, I will be using this on my shirt. But I have some other flannel. It's same type, but it's gray. And I'm cut out a collar piece out of the gray. And I'm going to show you how I would make my collar with this one, okay? And then just pretend that's how I did it. And then we'll move on from there, okay? So I hope that helps. So the one step that I did that I mentioned earlier that I wish that the neckline had been stay stitched earlier, okay? Well, finally, at this point, it's step number 54, they tell you to stay stitch the collar. So I did, and I have it stay stitched just over 1/4 of an inch in, and I'll tell you why later, but that's how I have done that. And make sure when you are stay stitching it, don't stretch your fabric out of shape, just kind of guide it nice and easy so that if anything had gotten out of shape, it'll work itself back in at that point. So let's make a collar. Okay, so starting out here, this is my collar piece with the interfacing on it. And this is my regular one. So for me, the interface side is the side that I want to be on the top, the one that everyone sees. The one that is not interfaced, I want to be underneath. So just to keep them straight right now, I'm going to put a big U on the under collar, okay? That way I know this is the under collar. Once I flip it and it's not as obvious which side has the interfacing on it, that'll make more sense. So what the instructions want you to do is pin this together and add a 5/8 inch seam allowance, stitch up, over and down, turn it and top stitch it. And that's what I did here. And there's nothing wrong with that, it's just not my favorite. So if that's what you want to do, that is fine. What I'm going to do though is only stitch the very top of this. And I'm going to stitch it at 5/8. And I'm going to come all the way across from this edge all the way over to this edge at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, I'm having a lot of camera trouble, so I'm on the phone with tech support. If you hear them chime in, I will cut away. But I want to show you I have my understitching done here. And now I'm going to come back on this side and I'm going to trim all the excess away just beyond that understitching, the entire length of my collar. Okay, so now that I have that all trimmed, when you go to fold the edge, it's going to give you a nice crisp rolled top here. The understitching's not going to show on your garment because that's going to be underneath. And it's just a really nice finish. So what I want to do now, open it back up again, and I'm going to be sewing these side seams. Now the way I'm going to do it is I'm folding it over like this at the very top so that this is my understitching holding it, but when I lay it down flat, I'm going to bring my interfaced side over. So at the very bottom of my collar, there's about 1/8 of an inch showing of my under collar one, okay? This one's going to be in a little bit. What that's going to do is make my under collar slightly narrower, so it's going to want to naturally pull the sides under, kind of like the top is. So I'm going to stitch this at 5/8 of an inch also. Alright, so now I have my side seams done, and I clipped the corner, but I'm actually going to be coming in because I need to get this nice and tight, and I'm clipping in really close to that seam up there, okay? But it's been reinforced, so we should be okay. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Come down just outside of that seam and go out. And just for funsies, I am going to pink the rest of this just because it makes me happy. Okay, so now I'm going to flip it right side out. I'm going to try to pull out this corner as carefully as I can here. There's all kinds of nifty little hacks you can do to get a sharp corner, but I think that that's pretty good. Okay, I actually got my little collar turner, point turner tool, and that was able to finish pressing it out. Hang on. Sorry about that. I am been on the phone with Sony tech support because I'm having camera issues, so we'll figure out what has to happen while my camera's in the shop. Anyhow, that aside, I have my corners pressed out now nicely, and so if I go to my ironing board, this is my underside because you can see the understitching here, and I'm going to press this across the top first. Okay, so I have pressed the top, and because it's understitched, you can see on the right side it's lovely, on the wrong side you see a row of understitching, but that's not a bad thing. So now if I go to press the sides, remember we sewed it in a little bit on the side, so technically the underside should be slightly smaller than the outside, which should be similar in effect to what the understitching does up here, which is to make the fabric from the top want to curve over to the bottom. So down here at the bottom of my collar, this is the wrong side. This is the under collar part. You can see that the top curls under, so that on the right side you don't have any of that under collar visible, and you also don't need to top stitch it. And at this point, nothing else on the shirt has been top stitched, so you know, this way it will match that whole aesthetic there. So now it's time to go ahead and attach this to the collar band. So now that we have something to compare, this is the collar the way I like it, okay? This is the collar made by the pattern. And yeah, this is 100% workable, and it will have to be because I'm going to be sewing it onto my shirt. But I just wanted to show you how I would prefer to have done this, and I should have done it. I should have gone with my gut, but I didn't. But I think that this gives a very nice collar. You know, everything is fine. So I'm just going to set this aside, and who knows, I have a lot of this gray. I may just make another flannel shirt out of it or something. So we'll just put that aside over there for right now. I'm laying out my pattern on here, and you can see that, see this circle? That's where the edge is supposed to be, and over here it's lining up fine. So I'm not worried about it. It's going to fit okay, but I am going to go ahead and mark the center back on here. So this is done. I know that the very edge here are where the dots are on this pattern, and these dots here are going to match up with the collar band. But since the dot is technically the edge, it's not a big deal. So now on my collar band, I am punching out all of the important marks, okay? And there are several for different reasons. And these triangles up here are matching where it's lining up with the top of the shoulder. Okay, so I'm actually going to put all these markings on both of my pieces, the facing and the standard one. So just ignore that when I cut that by mistake. It's this one, and the centers, the shoulder pieces, and the notches. All right, now I need to trim 1/4 inch off all the way around. If you wanted to, you could do it while you're cutting out, but I kind of wanted to save my pattern piece in its original form. So what I'm going to do is just mark in where 1/4 inch is, and then I will come back and trim around that line. Now you can see my marks here. I have my layers pinned together. You can see my marks. My marks are still well inside there, and so I'm going to be using a much smaller seam allowance, round that out a little better, to come around here. Okay, so I'm going to finish trimming that 1/4 inch off all the way around the top. You know, while I'm in that mode of trimming, I'm going to go ahead and trim the bottom too. I will need to do this eventually anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and make it that same 1/4 inch that I'm taking off down here. And one more, while I'm at it, I am also trimming off a 1/4 inch at the bottom of the collar that I just made. So, in the instructions, they ask you to baste the bottom of your collar closed, and I would not necessarily have to do it on here, but if you did baste it, try to baste it at or above that 1/4 inch if you're going to do this, so you don't cut it all off. All right, so with that done, now on this collar, the one that's following their instructions, it doesn't really matter which one is the right side and which one is the wrong side, because they both look the same. But in general, the one that has the interfacing on it is the one that I want to be my public one, okay? And so collars are kind of funny because the public collar is going to be on the same side as the private band, because when a collar is standing up, the part that's visible to the outside on the band is the interface side, okay? So it's going to be matching up like this. So let me open this up. Now, you had to mark all of those dots on your collar stand, your collar band here, and I'm going to flip it up and start matching them up. But where this dot is going to match up with the place at the very edge of your collar. All right, so let me just put that there. And our center collar is going to match up with the center of the band, and over here on the opposite side, this edge of this collar also matches up with where that dot is right there. So we're basically sandwiching the collar in between these two pieces, okay? But again, I'm making my interface side of my band match up with the non-interface side with the collar, and you know, the same on the other. So I can, once I have this one matched up with that dot, then I can just line up the overall size with this one. And make sure I get my end over here pinned too, so it's not going to go anywhere. Now, having it trimmed to 1/4 inch, collars are weird curves, you know. Some curves are like opposite of what you think they should be. And having a much shorter seam allowance is going to make these pieces more flexible and less bulky, and actually easier to control. So now I can take this piece over to my sewing machine, and I am going to sew starting in the center back. So here's my little mark for my center back. I'm going to extend it up here so we can see it easier. Okay, starting from the center back, I'm going to start here and come all the way out and down at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, okay? Which may seem odd. I cut a 1/4 off, I'm doing a 1/4, you know, a 1/4 plus or minus is what I should say. And the same thing over here, flip it this way, go all the way around straight off the edge. Now, I need to flip this right side out. So I'm going to make sure it's not too bulky. Clip that, and I'm going to make some little clips coming around the curve here. I'm not going all the way up to my stitching line. I don't want to do that. So hopefully you'll be able to push it out, and this dot will be where your seam allowance is. That's your goal at this point. So it looks like it worked on both ones. I have a little dot at the end there too. So I'm going to go ahead, take this over to my ironing board and press this out flat. If you have any puckers or anything over here, you might need to trim out a little more or make some more clips on the inside. But it should look like that right now. Now at this point, I want to make sure that the center of my collar is where I think it is based on the markings. So I'm folding it in half, you know, where these collars here are lined up, and pressing it out, and I'm just sticking a pin in that fold just to see what it looks like. And now I'm going to draw a line connecting those two pins. Now on your band, we did cut some things off. You can see these shoulder marks are still right here. I did cut off my notches, so I'm actually just going to make a little mark where that notch is there and over here. I'm not going to clip it, I'm just make my little marks so that I can match that up. Now, you saw how easy it was to sew all of this because the seam allowance was so small, but do you see this sharp jump down? That's because I didn't grade it, I didn't pink it or anything like that. So at this point I can fix that. So I'm just pinking the edge off if I can. This is very thick because I've got basically 4 layers of flannel in here. Okay, 4 layers of flannel and 2 layers of interfacing. It's a very thick part. All right, so this is my top here, and we cut seam allowance off everything else, and that means we also have to cut it off from around the neckline. I do have it stay stitched at just beyond a 1/4 inch, so that's very helpful to me because I can just basically trim out just inside this stay stitching. I'm just going to mark the very fronts because this part here, it's more important that it's exact. And trim off a 1/4 inch all the way around my neckline. Now right here is my notch. So I'm just going to go ahead and transfer that little mark right here, just with a little dot so I can see it there. I am going to transfer my center back mark. I'm going to put that right here. Okay, so I can find that easily. Now what I need to do is pin that collar band on. And if you can see what I mean, there's a lot of curves that are doing different things, okay? So because it's a narrower seam allowance, it's going to be so much easier to work around those curves. All right, so if you remember, the public part of the band is the one that's going towards the right side of the fabric out here. This is my inside, okay? This is my outside. You know, this has the pocket and everything. This is the inside. So I'm putting the side that has the interfacing towards the outside, the side, just talking about the band here, the side without interfacing towards the inside. So this is my center back mark, okay? This is the inside of my shirt, and I'm going to be pinning to the inside of my shirt the uninterfaced side of the band, all right? And I am matching up these center back pieces right here. And remember, when you sew it, you're sewing it at a smaller seam allowance, okay? So I'm matching that up first, and then I'm matching up this. This dot here has to match up with the edge. The dot is up here. That's the point where it has to match up. This out here is going to stick out a little bit further. I don't care about that. What I care about is right here, okay? And I'm going to be sewing the non-interfaced side first. So I want to be able to open this up flat like this, okay? And have that dot on the edge, which means this little point is sticking out beyond it. About 1/8 of an inch beyond it at this point. All right, so I'm going to put a pin right there. Now everything in between here just needs to get matched up. I think there's a couple notches that I need to put together here and get that all settled in, get these pins. So let me just go ahead and pin all of this together like that, and then we'll do the other side. So coming back over to this side now, here's my dot that has to line up with the outside edge, all right? And I'm going to open it up a bit and make sure that dot lines up with the edge. So when I'm putting this flat against the top, you can see there's a little bit of a point that's going to stick out. Can you see that? That there's a little point that's sticking out here, but this dot position is matching up, okay? That's what's important to me. All right, so I'm folding this flat back out of the way. I'm getting started at my center back, and I'm giving myself a seam allowance just over 1/4 inch, so it's just barely sticking out the edge of my foot. And we're going to get going. Trying to hold things nice and firmly, and keep all of your shirt, you know, just kind of straightened out as you go so you don't have any wrinkles of fabric underneath here. And again, see how I'm kind of tugging this open while I'm sewing. And I'm making sure this is still in its right position here. And I can see on the inside where there's a stitching line. Okay, so this is the opposite side. And I'm trying to hold my camera so you can see the angle I'm looking at. The seam that I'm aiming for, this is the seam of my collar that's at an angle, that little point that's peeking out. And this is where I'm stitching. And I'm aiming for this point right here, where this seam that's at an angle is going to hit the trajectory of my stitching line, which is going to be right there. So I don't have a pin here because I'm going to hold it with my finger and just match that up. All right, so back over the table, this is what it looks like. Nice band. This is the inside, okay? This is the inside of it. Now I'm going to flip it over here to the outside. And this is what it looks like, which seems like it's a opposite land. But what I like about this is at this point, I can turn my edge under and I can pin it so it exactly covers that stitching line. Okay, and over here, because I'm sewing with a non-interfaced side with the sewing machine, it's more malleable. I can work it around without puckers and things like that. I get a smoother seam here. Over here, where there is interfacing, I can gently tuck it in and very strategically place exactly where I want it to go and pin it into place so that I can come back with my sewing machine and top stitch the very edge of this down, and it will be exactly where I want it to be. So let me finish pinning it. If you get up to this corner and this bulk bothers you, you can trim it off. I'm actually going to leave that in there because I don't want anything peeking out at me. But I can tuck it in with my awl pretty well. So it's nice and tight that way. All right, so now I have it all pinned. This is the right side, and I'm going to be basically stitching it up here the same distance that this is, that 1/16 of an inch in, all around this bottom edge. All right, so this is how she looks so far. You know, pretty darn respectable for a little flannel shirt. And so now all I need to do is put on buttons and buttonholes. I had some questions about this last time. I just wanted to show you, this is the package, Simflex. I think I have added a link to it in my Amazon links. I think I bought mine on the Waywalk website. They have them all over the place. They're aluminum. Just look for aluminum or accordion or expanding buttonhole guide, okay? Now I'm getting it out because I don't want my buttons to go as far down. I am never going to button this all the way to the bottom, all right? I'm probably gonna want my buttons to end about here, which is closer to where my hips are kicking in. Below that, no. So I'm gonna want my first button up here. All right, I have 7 buttons to play with. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So one of these I don't need to worry about. So if I want my bottom button to be right about here, this is what's going to give me the placement. So I'm just going to put a line there, a buttonhole, buttonhole, buttonhole. And this is just strictly for the up and down placement, okay? For the placement this way, vertically, all right? So now what I'm going to be doing is this band is 1 inch wide, thereabouts, 1 1/8 inches, okay? So what I'm going to do is draw a line along the center of it. It wants to go up there. Okay, so the buttons that I'm using are 5/8. So what I want is to take my ruler along and place it longwise so that this line I just drew lines up with something on here, so I know that I have it squared. Then, let me move you in here. Okay, so say this red line I'm lining up with my chalk line, like that. All right, then I'm going to take my little dot that I drew and I'm going to move it down so it's on the 1/4 inch line below it and draw a little hash mark. All right, that is the point where I'm going to start my buttonhole going this way. Okay, that's supposed to be an arrow going that way. And I will be starting it at this point and going down so I can have a gauge that way. So this is my guide for my buttonhole. All right, starting up here and going down. And I'm going to do that for all of these, lining my guide up on that chalk line, putting the dot 1/4 inch down in there. And it's a 1/4 inch down because my buttons use a 5/8 inch buttonhole. So 1/4 inch is about the closest measurable distance I'll have to half of 5/8 of an inch. All right, so I'm just going to do this all the way down because these buttonholes go up and down, they don't go back and forth. This one up here though, this one's going to go back and forth. So where it is lining up here at the 1/2 inch, I can just draw a line that's going like right in the middle of this band off that way. So I'll be making a buttonhole here that is the same size as these. It's just going that way and these are going down. All right, so I've got my buttonholes sewn. I'm just cutting them open. Cutting them open with my little chisel here. Like that, and then I will stitch. Actually, next I'm going to get a little dampness on my cloth and rub all of these chalk marks off of here. All right, so with all my buttonholes made, I just need to mark them. So I am just going to go right in the center of each one of these buttonholes. I have it overlapped on top of the other band and clipped in place so it'll stay put. I'm just going through the very center of the buttonhole and placing a little dot, which is going to tell me where the corresponding button needs to be lined up. So now that I've done that, I can open up all of my clips. And you can see that my dots are all over the place. Some dots down here, this one's way up there. So this is their position this way, okay? So I'm just drawing little lines through them this way. Now I'm going to take my ruler and put it at, I'm going to put this one at 5/8 of an inch and put a little cross. Where that cross marks is where that button should be placed. And this top one, you know, I'm going to put right there. Odds are I will never, ever button that. But that's where I'm going to sew them, where those little T's cross. I like my flannel shirt. It's a basic shirt, you know, and it's male, female, just comfortable, classic flannel shirt. So I hope that you've enjoyed it. My overall is, it's a good shirt. Now, make sure you fix your sleeves so they match your arms, because the sleeve pattern is very long. And if you wanted to do all of their fitting stuff, sure, go ahead, you could do that. I just didn't really think it was necessary for me, my body type and everything like that. It is very straight, you know, so make sure that when you're sizing it, you pick your widest point. If it's your bust, if it's your hips, if it's your belly, whatever that is, make sure that that's going to fit in there, because it is a very straight shirt. It's not like super flare, but it's comfortable. I mean, the sleeves are nice. I did not adjust the width of the sleeves at all, and I think that they work nice. I like combining the two sleeve parts into one. I think that's a lot easier, and I don't see a point to having two sleeve parts if you're not doing their tissue method. I think that the only reason they have the two sleeve parts is because in their method they have you cut and all kinds of stuff with that. But we're not doing origami today, we're just sewing, and that's fine. I do like the way I do collars and I attach them better than the pattern way, okay? The pattern pieces are fine, the dimensions are fine, but when I make it, I prefer to have a smaller seam allowance, and I prefer to make my collars so that they're neater, you know, with the understitching and having the under collar slightly smaller. But that's just a personal preference, and if you want to do it their way, like this, I think it's fine. No one is going to stop me on the street and say, I notice your collar is not perfect. They're not. And sometimes if you've never made a shirt that has a collar band and a collar on it, it can be a little intimidating. What I would do, if it's your first time, do a mock-up of it, you know, figure out how it works, because it is kind of like origami, putting it together, you know, but do it that way, and then when you do your final fabric, you're going to feel so much more confident in it, and it'll be easy. It's like putting in a fly, you know, you have to kind of work through all those steps. So anyhow, I hope you liked it, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life. Free every city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses in to the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful flat houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.